Okay, good morning, everybody. So, as I say, I'm Philippe Dumas from EJEC. We are the coordinator of this GEORISK project, and thank you all for attending this webinar to present you a bit the project and the first work we have done on a series of documentation for risk assessment and risk mitigation tools on geothermal energy. You can see the agenda, so I will shortly start to present the project. After we give the floor to Thomas Le Guenan from the French Geocast Survey BRGM. We will present the risk register we are about to build, introducing notably the risk assessment tool. We will have a Q&A session on this risk register. Following that, we will have two of our presentations on financial institutions and mapping the potential contributors to a geothermal risk insurance scheme, and a presentation from Günther Sidicki from the Swiss Federal Office of Energy on the risk mitigation scheme already in operation. Following that, we'll have the second question and answer session. So I'll start with presenting shortly what is about this GEORISK project. Okay, so where it comes from the idea that indeed it exists already for many years, geothermal risk insurance scheme in Europe, but also all over the world. And we have seen that indeed some have been well designed and some maybe less perfectly designed. And one criteria for that is indeed the market maturity. The geothermal market maturity is a criteria on how you have to establish your scheme. All GEORISK is about that, how to well design a geothermal insurance scheme according to the maturity of your market. We are a consortium of 15 partners. You can see that EJEC, the European Geothermal Association, who are the coordinator. We have partners in France, Turkey, Hungary, Poland, Greece, Switzerland, Germany. And you will see that our project is to work mainly in Europe, but we have also some activities later on third countries, mainly in Africa and South America. The key target countries are the countries in Europe having already risk insurance scheme, and some potential countries where we can see development of deep geothermal, but the risk insurance scheme is not yet established. Here we speak mainly about Greece, Hungary, and Poland. One first work, as I was mentioning, is about risk assessment. We are currently working on the context and the identification of a potential risk, drafting a geothermal risk register, and it will be the presentation of Thomas Le Guenan just after my presentation. We are also drafting a risk matrix, and that it's a work to be done until before end of the year. And finally, we'll have an online tool for developers that we call the GEORISK report. After having looked at the technical risk, we are also looking at the financial aspects. So we'll review the different existing risk insurance scheme and innovative financial tools. We are also studying a bit the legal framework and regulatory framework, drafting the framework condition for establishment of a new insurance scheme. It's about the questionnaire that Günther Sidicki will present later. And the condition for the transition of the insurance scheme according to market maturity. And here I'll remind you the slide I presented before, so the graph showing market maturity and the different insurance schemes. We will draft for the public authorities a help desk presenting the main aspect on how to establish an insurance scheme. Following that, we have the main objective in our project to see the realization of and the establishment of risk insurance schemes. So we will engage with decision makers and do all our best to have this risk insurance scheme established in the target countries. As I mentioned, it was Hungary, Poland, and Greece to start with. We will also, during the project, adopt some corrective measures if we see that the establishment is not properly done. And finally, as I say, we'll have a replication and promotion of the work we are doing in Europe and outside Europe. In Europe, the candidate countries are Denmark, Netherlands, Croatia, and Slovenia. Also looking at Canary Islands, maybe also for Spain. And outside Europe, we speak about Chile, Kenya, and Mexico. This is not closed list, it's open for discussion. If somebody wants to propose, we can also consider your proposal. We're also looking at not only country-specific risk insurance scheme, but maybe also regional schemes like a Pannonian Basin GEORISK insurance scheme. And finally, we will have a different capacity building also, and we'll organize some workshop, and we will develop different tools and webinars for this replication. To conclude my presentation, for people interested in financing and investment in geothermal, I'll invite you to this event in Frankfurt on 28th of March, the IGC Invest Geothermal Forum. I remind you that before end of this week, you can have a reduced price if you want to attend this event, and you can see here the different topics, and risk insurance will be one of the topics. With that information, I thank you all for following this webinar, for having listened to my presentation, and I go now the floor to Thomas Le Guenant for presenting this risk register.
So thank you everyone for listening. I will give you a presentation on the current work we are doing on the risk register, and then perspectives on the work under work package 2. So that Philippe introduced, work package 2 is focused on risk assessment, and it's the risk part, let's say, of the project. The objective of this work package is to assess and present the risks that could be mitigated financially. The first step of risk assessment is risk identification. We provide the list of plausible risks, which we call this list a risk register. What risk are we considering? It's from the point of view of operator or developer of geothermal energy projects, and we consider all the risks that would prevent us from not being able to reach the initial objectives. So all technical, economic, environmental, safety objectives. A preliminary warning: at this stage, we are only scanning for everything that is plausible, remotely possible. So it does not mean that all the risks are important, and we will see that would be the next steps of our work to rank the risk and see which of them are more important than others. The approach we followed. So the starting point, of course, is that there were already a number of previous European projects, including Darling, GeoElec, GeoWell, etc., and a lot of other projects. And so that's already a great wealth of information. We reviewed since October existing literature. We have more than 70 documents, including scientific papers, reports, and presentations in our knowledge base. And of course, as you could see in the previous presentation, we have a good consortium. Each partner can contribute with its own experience. So we ended up with the first risk register with more than 200 risks, and it was structured with phases, causes, main events, consequences, risk factors, mitigation actions. And it turned out to be quite unpractical to manage. Especially, it was hard to see if we missed some risk, or if we had too many risks covering the same area. So we worked in internal workshops, and we created a second version where we simplified the structure, and I will come back to this. And we also simplified the content, and we have now about 50 individual risks. So this is the results. I will try to detail a little bit more, because of course this is a bit too much to handle in only one time. So let's start with the structure. We have each risk placed in one or several phases. So right now, this is how they're called. Of course, the wording may evolve as we have better ideas. The first phase is identification, exploration. It's basically all the activities that happen before the drilling has started. Then the second phase is drilling, testing, development, and it's all the activities before we start the full commercial exploitation of the project. Then we have the exploitation phase and the post-closure phase. We give two kinds of potential adverse consequences to each risk. The first one is economic or performance, and the second is health, safety, environment. Bearing in mind that, of course, most risk, even environmental risk, also have a consequence, economic consequence. And then in the register, we have a very important section, which are mitigation actions. And we have both technical mitigation actions and financial or insurance mitigation actions, which is the point, the main objective of this project. So I will try to give you an overview of the current list of risks that we have. So it's if you saw on in the overview various colors, they represent categories that we have, and we have 6 of them. So external hazards, external context, internal deficiencies, subsurface uncertainties, technical issues, and environmental risks. The goal we had was to be as comprehensive as possible. It's better to have overlaps than gaps. And of course, it's not a 100% consistent list. Several risks may be part of the same chain, so they can be one can be followed by other risks in the list. And I want to stress again that the goal of the project is to focus on solutions and not only on the potential problems. So this is just the preliminary input of the project. I forgot also to mention that those risks, of course, are generic. They're not. They should be applicable to any or to most geothermal, deep geothermal energy projects. And we had to adjust the level of details so it could be manageable. So you will see that some risks we have can be quite broad in the way they are worded. So the first category, external hazards, we have basically separated between external natural hazards and external man-made hazards. The second category are risks related to the external context, or let's say economic and business environment. It includes changes in policies, laws, taxes, regulations, and which can put the development in jeopardy. Lack of financing for the next phases. We have, of course, the low social acceptance that can put barrier to development, and public oppositions against nuisance from the exploitation, which is a bit different. In the second case, it's the public that oppose after they are they hear or they are faced with the geothermal exploitation. We have unanticipated delays in costs in operations, lack or loss of clients, and significant changes of energy costs. The third categories are what I call the internal deficiencies, and it's all these risks are rooted in the fact that the operator or developer may not be up to the challenge. So we have low financing for work leading to low safety standards. The design of well leads to reduced flow rates. A very generic risk, which is the best practice well not applied, and it can lead to a whole range of problems. We have unsuitable contracts where roles and responsibility are not clearly defined, and it can lead to suboptimal work. We have the human error leading to failure during drilling or work, the wrong choice of stimulation fluids or techniques which can damage the reservoir well. Organization is not experienced, financially robust enough for the challenge, and demand analysis and forecast are inaccurate. The fourth category is the broadest, and it's certainly the core of our project. It's all the risks related to uncertainty in the subsurface. What sometimes we call geological risk. But we have subdivided this into all this list. So we have basically risk related to flow rates, both initially lower than expected and then degradation over time. We have the same risk for temperature, pressure, and fluid chemistry or physical properties. Then we have target formation missing in the well, target formation has no fluid, geological stratigraphy is different than expected, then excessive scaling in the geothermal loop and excessive corrosion in the geothermal loop, particle production, hydraulic connectivity between wells suboptimal, reinjection of the fluid is more difficult than expected, and degradation of the reservoir. The fifth category are linked with technical issues. So it's mainly drilling, but it can also be during other works during exploitation. So mud losses, wrong density of mud leading to damage to well reservoir, not being able to lower the casing string, trajectory issues so during drilling. Also, generic one, drilling is more complicated, more expensive than anticipated. It's especially true for geothermal in very deep and specific contexts. Technical failure during drilling, also a big generic. Rig issues, depending on the type of soil. Issues in transporting, handling radioactive sources for diagraphy. Technical failure of the equipment and well casing collapse. Finally, environmental risks, which we reduce to blowouts, fluid communication between different formations due to bad isolation of the well, induced seismicity, subsidence or uplift, toxic emissions due to produced in situ gases and fluids, lack or loss of integrity of the wells, and loss of integrity of surface equipments. So this was about 50 risks I just cited. It may not be the most interesting thing to hear, but this at least is the overview. I hope you could grasp the bulk of the risks. So right now I have to stress that it's a work in progress. So all the risks you saw may evolve, or we can delete some of them and add if we have some obvious risk that's missing from the list. And now the main focus we have would be on the description of the mitigation actions. We currently, and I showed it in the overview, have a mitigation action for all the risks I just showed, but it would be too long to present today. And this part is very important. It's because it can show that the risks are not hurdles, but merely barriers that can be removed. The next step in the work package is the risk assessment step, where each risk will be positioned in a risk matrix, so probability versus severity risk matrix. Since risks are context dependent, we will introduce at this stage the risk factors, which are the main one being the geographical and geological context, the type of use of the energy and the depths, etc. As part of the project, we already identified the main plate types, and we checked against existing geothermal installations in the main project countries, so that we did not forget any plate types. And as Philippe mentioned, also the main outcome of the work package will be an online tool for developers. The current idea is that in the tool, the main characteristic of a project would be given as inputs. So again, type of geothermal energy, the range of depth, type of geology, country, etc. And the tool would give back, let's say, a ranked list of the main risks, and also all the knowledge we have on potential technical and financial mitigation solutions. This work has not started yet, so this is a very preliminary overview I give you, and development will start in the next few months, and the first beta is expected for the end of 2019. With this, I think I finished my presentation, so I thank you all for listening, and I need also to thank all the GEORISK partners who contributed to this risk register.
Thank you, Thomas, for this really clear and interesting presentation. We have now a 10 minutes question and answer session. So you can raise your hand or ask a question online, and we'll try to answer.
I see some questions from the chat. So maybe I can take them. So the first one was great presentation so far. Thank you. Do you provide the risk register as a publication? So the first obvious thing is that it will be a report of the project, and all reports, if I'm not mistaken, will be public. So it will be a report on the website, and we will present it in a conference next year, and we probably will do a paper as well, but more on the whole work package, so on the whole risk assessment process, not only on the risk register. And the second question, hi, where are the political risks? So we have one line for political risks, which we call the changes in laws, policies, etc. I don't remember the exact wording. So they are included in one line, but maybe I don't know if other risks are if there are other kind of political risks. The exact wording is changes in policies, laws, taxes, and regulations.
Thomas, I will give the floor to Lauren Debuchon from Storengy. She has a specific question on how the risk will be adapted. Maybe I give you the floor, Lauren. Yeah. Your mic is open.
Yeah. Hello. This is just to understand, because all the risks you have mentioned are global, and how can you adapt mitigation solutions to each country? You mentioned, of course, the regulation, the different rules. Do you have local stakeholders who can help you on that subject?
Yes. Okay. So maybe Philippe, you want to answer, because it's more on the mitigation solution than on the risk themselves.
Indeed. So as I was saying before, we are a consortium of 15 partners, and we will look at indeed two really specific schemes according to local situation. We will do that in Europe, firstly in Greece, Hungary, and Poland. And later on, we will do in specific selected key countries in Europe and outside Europe. All proposals are welcome for this work. The good thing is that in the consortium, we have partners in Poland, Greece, and Hungary. So indeed, if we want to work in other countries, we need to find some partnership. I saw that also Francisco Baccarin from Enel wanted to raise his hand to ask a question.
Hello, everyone.
Yes.
We are both Francesco Baccarini and Jeff Giudetti from Pisa Enel. And our question is about the online tool. You said that this tool will be online, but will be available also outside the consortium or not? Thank you.
So I think Philippe may correct me if I'm wrong. It will be open to everyone. Maybe we will ask just subscription, just a mail, so we are sure there's no maybe misuse of the tool. But it will be free and open.
Maybe one thing we have to remind is that indeed this project is supported by public money, supported by the European Union co-funding. So indeed, all our publication will be available. More on that, I could say that draft publication will also be available to selected experts. So if you're interested, you could also look at draft tools. They will be presented in another webinar, but also in some local events. So you will also opportunity to comment on the draft tools. And after, of course, the online tool will be available to everybody. Do we have one more raised hand? I don't see. Yes, a lot of. We cannot give to everybody, but I see that, for example, Martin van der Hout, maybe I give you the floor from Netherlands to have an overview.
Yes, thank you, Philippe, for organizing this. It's great to see. We have a discussion in the Netherlands with insurance companies, and it is presented about all technical items, but especially financiers and insurance companies are focusing on the potential cost which are related to risk, because that's needed for them to come up to a proper business case to supply proper insurances. Is the cost estimation also linked in this project, or isn't it?
So I will start to answer for regarding strictly work package 2 on the risks. We do not directly go into this kind of detail. So cost is not obviously is not taken into account basically. But like I mentioned, we will try to be a lot more specific in the subsequent steps regarding all what we call risk factors, but it's more let's say all the context that can go into cost. So it will be indirect indication of potential cost, I would say. But I have to say I am not sure. You mentioned potential cost. Cost of development, I think we will not necessarily cover in this project. Is it cost over, let's say, cost induced by the risk if it's happened?
Yeah, I think it will be treated in the next step by Gecko, and looking at what are the tools to mitigate this risk, notably financial tools. And I think it's a good transition now to the next discussion, which is about financing. I apologize. I see that many of you raise your hand and ask questions. We have some time constraints, so please ask your question in the Q&A part that you can find, and we'll answer to all of them with the right answer. Okay? I'll now give the floor to Christian Boissavy to present the mapping of financial institutions. Christian, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. So happy to present you the next coming. So to answer to Martin, waiting the loading. We will go on cost further, I would say, and on my presentation regarding the risk mitigation tools by Virginie Schmidle and myself, we put AFPG. GeoDeep is the cluster for deep geothermal, and it is part of AFPG. My presentation has 5 different things. So the task to be carried out in the framework of GEORISK project, an inventory of existing risk mitigation scheme, an example regarding the French fund, which is working now since a very long time. We will also have a look to the inventory of financial institution, and I will present after that the next step in the project. So if we go to the task to be carried out in the framework of the work the VP 3.1, we have two sections. One is the inventory of existing risk mitigation schemes, which could be public-private or public-private. You know that numerous risk mitigation systems are existing in the world. Some of them are terminated or closed, sometimes because unsuccessful. So we have done a full inventory, I would say. Finally, at the beginning, we were focusing on Europe, and finally we have done a full world inventory, and we have already in a big Excel file a total number of 21 scheme inventoried, 1 which is not yet launched, 6 which are finished or terminated, and 14 ongoing. And I believe this approach will give us the opportunity to see what is working, what is not working, what are the costs of the funds, what the funds are covering, etc., to make a synthesis of all those working funds, and afterwards to allow us to propose solution on the targeted country. You remember, we are talking for Europe about Greece, Poland, and Hungary. We have already seen that many funds, some funds had a very short time life when talking in particular about the private insurance, the full private insurance schemes, and then others which are more public oriented or a mix in between public and private money present a very long longevity. So that's the first theme. The other one is an inventory of financial institutions. So we have created a large list of financial institutions which normally are capable to be interested in geothermal energy, and who are maybe ready to facilitate innovative solution in order to have the drilling of geothermal wells, even in risky zones. And we have already contacted some of those financial institutions, and on my opinion, they are ready to participate to some dedicated insurance scheme. If we go to have a quick look on the table we have done for the existing risk mitigation scheme, so you see, okay, it's impossible to describe everything, but on the left side you have the name of the fund, you have if it is ongoing, finished, or whatever, a lot of description of what it gives, an evaluation of what money is available, of what are the costs, etc. So that will be presented and published also in the year 2019, and there will be a report on all these funds to present the advantages and disadvantages of all those funds. Afterwards, I will present you shortly the example of the French fund created in 1980. So you see that the montage at the beginning, the name of the fund is SAF, which is Société Auxiliaire de Financement in French. And you see the participation of a lot of different partners, Natixis, which is a private bank, Caisse des dépôts et consignations, which is a French state bank, SAF, which is the administration of the fund, is also a subsidiary of Caisse des dépôts et consignations. You see another bank, which is a Crédit Foncier de France, active in the construction and building sector. And the fifth, which is very interesting, it's a company, HLM mean in French, low cost collective housing. So it's an aggregate of all those companies which are building and exploiting these low cost collective housings. It's related with the year of the foundation of the fund. At that time, the first geothermal plant were built in the very dense and very populated zone where it's possible to find this big building at low cost. If we go to the next to have an idea of what is how is operated the fund. So in the middle, you see the fund itself, SAF, and you see the relationship in between the state, which is AFMA, which has given since the beginning a strong participation from the state. So we have the fund management by the SAF. We have a technical expertise by experts, and in particular the BRGM, the French Geological Survey. And if you go to the right part of the diagram, you see that the developers who are public or private bodies are inside the loop, and they are paying fees. And everything is in connection with the administration in charge of the mining code. And you see also that there are reimbursement in case of error. If we go to numbers now, on the next slide. So those two funds, because we have a short term covering the geological and hydrogeological risk at the beginning, when drilling the geothermal plants, and we have also long term coverage, which cover the decrease of the geothermal resource during the lifetime of the plant. And so the fund starts in 1980 and was reinitialized in 2008 with the same pillar, I would say. And for example, you can see end of 2017, the resource of the fund are at 13.8 million euro. And you see that more or less it is splitted in between the money given by the French government, which is 9 million, subsidies from the Région Île-de-France to encourage the deployment of geothermal in the Paris area. You have the fees from developers, which are not so small. You see it's 7.4 million, the financial project of the money given by the government, and the cost of the fund itself, taking into account the reimbursement given to the project with failure, and the expertise and management of the fund for 4.7 million euro. At that time, we have 31 short-term contracts signed. And what is very interesting is even with a very good geological and hydrogeological knowledge, the developers are continuing to subscribe even after nearly 40 years of drilling in the Paris area, and recent drilling proved to us that there is still always a geological risk. So you see the 15 long-term contracts which are signed for 20 years. And look at the two last line. You see that during the 10 last year of exploitation, the fund guaranteed 250 million euro with a leverage effect of 28 for 1 euro granted by the French government, which is really impressive. And for the long-term fund, you see also the figure a little bit less, but you see that we're less long-term contract signed compared to the short-term contract signed. Just to give you an idea that in the following part of the GEORISK project, we are going to focus also mainly on the money problem, on the financing, on the investment of on the reimbursement which is possible with those funds. If we go to the next, very quickly to show you in the same kind of big Excel sheet, the inventory of financial institution. We have prepared already the table as maybe 200 lines. So we are going to proceed like the risk register. At the end, we are going to sack a lot of lines. At the moment, we are working with the partners, and you see, for example, in red and green, the contribution for the different partners. But I hope that we will complement this task very quickly now to finish the work. And going to the next, which is the last two. So what is the next step? The report has to be completed for this part by June this year. What we can say that the scheme inventory is achieved. We will have a presentation with detailed explanation of the management of the different fund we inventoried. That will allow to propose what are the best mechanism for the GEORISK fund design, including operational and management aspects, such as how to select the project for funding, which is very important, the funding criteria, the disbursement triggers, and the option for recovering and recycling funds after completion of the supported activities, because the objective of the fund we are going to try to establish in the targeted country is something to be long. It's not question to prepare something lasting 2 or 3 years and failing after 2 or 3 years. The idea is to have funds which are sustainable during 20, maybe more, maybe 30 years. So regarding the financial institution inventory, you understood that it's still ongoing and has to be complemented. It is a very important task because that will allow us to make interviews and also webinar to present the fund we are going to establish to those stakeholders, and that will be done during the work package 4 and 5. So, and I believe I finished. I thank you very much for your attention and remain at your disposition for any details.
Thank you very much, Christian. The Q&A session will be after the next presentation because we have a second presentation now from Günther Sidicki.
I work together with Nico Lupi at the Swiss Federal Office of Energy. I'm going to give you a brief presentation on where we are with respect to a questionnaire regarding the risk mitigation scheme that we're going to share with, in the first instance, with our partners. So on the next slide, you'll see the 3 topics that I'll cover. Another way to skin a cat effectively, which is looking at risk categories, and this ties back to Thomas Legenau's presentation, that the very first presentation of this morning. I'm going to tell you something about the key drivers for risk mitigation schemes, especially those related to addressing the geological risk. And then I'm going to give you some information on the questionnaire and what we intend to do with it. So on the next slide, you will get to see a number of risk categories. And as Thomas has already indicated, there are various ways you can categorize risks: technical, economical, commercial, organizational, and political risks. And you can imagine that there's a whole slew of things you can do. You can either accept risks, you can manage the risks to, say, lower risk levels. You can even transfer risks if you so decide. And this is maybe something that I'm going to be focusing on, and I'm going to be addressing the geological risk. You might remember from Thomas' presentation that he had about 17 different hazards, threats, and risks that are related to the subsurface. And you can imagine the whole family of risks that are related to the uncertainty of the subsurface. So this is really the one topic where we think GEORISK can provide some added value. Another thing that is quite interesting, because it helps to address geological risk in a systematic fashion, is the fact that the geothermal industry is increasingly going towards play-based exploration concepts. This, of course, from a transfer of geological risk is very attractive, because it allows us to systematically identify common features that plays would have, and therefore adapt maybe our risk mitigation strategies. On the next slide, I'm going to tell you what we think are the primary drivers of entities that are willing to carry the geological risk. So very often you'll find a company or project developer who is uncomfortable accepting the geological risk and will turn to either a public entity, and the Swiss Federal Office of Energy would be one of those public entities that is willing to carry the geological risk. Or you might go to private-public partnerships, and this is something that Christian Boisseville just talked about with the SAF. Or you can go to basically the insurance industry, private entities who are willing and able to carry the risk. So one driver that we think one needs to address if you were to design a risk mitigation scheme that covers geological risk is you need to have an appropriate basis for a risk transfer scheme. So something that would effectively justify why you think you're in the right position to offer such a scheme. So for public entities, it would be something like a legal act that underpins support measures. In public-private entities or organizations, it might be a willingness to share the geological risk between public entities that are again constrained and private entities. In the private sector, of course, you know, there may be somebody with a vision and willingness to develop business opportunities that arise from, for example, mitigating climate change. So that is one of the drivers. Another driver, and this ties back again to Thomas' presentation on the 17 different hazards and risks in the subsurface, is you need to know which aspect, with some precision, related to the geological risk you're trying to transfer. You can imagine that there are a whole slew of already commercially available insurance schemes that address, for example, construction oil risk or, you know, loss of well control risks and so on. So this is something where there is a market and it functions better or worse, it doesn't matter, but there is a market. Yet there may be risks that, you know, you can socialize, for example, you can transfer to the public. So you can see that there's a whole different set of hazards and threats, and therefore risks that you need to transfer, and you need to understand pretty much which ones precisely you're willing to carry. Of course, at the core of things, the financing of the risk transfer scheme is very important. And again, you have various different classes of how you would finance a risk mitigation scheme, which depends on whether you're a public entity or a public-private entity or a business. And you can imagine that the sources of revenues that are required to finance a scheme will vary accordingly. So depending on where you are, which region, which country, which business, you are in, depending on the maturity of it, you'll probably need to think about how to finance it appropriately. Another big aspect is, and this is something that Christian Boissavy already alluded to, is what are the procedures? So suppose you were to transfer a geological risk, you would have to engage with project developers and establish, say, a common set of standards so that you are in a position to estimate, to verify whether or not you can actually accept that geological risk from a project developer. Another feature that, especially from the public, is always of interest is how does a risk transfer mechanism perform? So Christian, for example, pointed to a number of financial metrics. In other schemes that are maybe more public oriented, you might want to say, my scheme has performed well if the overall uncertainty of finding a suitable resource has been reduced at a regional or at a country level. So you can imagine that the performance metrics for various risk transfer mechanisms will vary quite a bit. And then, of course, one thing they always have to think about, and it really depends also on the region or the country you're operating in, what are the regulatory constraints on the various risk transfer mechanisms. So especially if you look at public schemes, you need to be somewhat in compliance with state aid regulations. If you're in the business, maybe you have very little regulatory constraints other than the standard business regulations that you're operating in. What next? On the next slide, what we're doing is we have established a bit of a template, basically a questionnaire. We try to keep it as short and as sweet as possible, yet obtain valuable or sort of meaningful information so that out of these identification and description of the drivers, we can then offer aid to countries or regions or maybe public-private partnerships who wish to design such geological risk mitigation schemes that are fit for their purpose. You can imagine that in some country, one scheme will work much better because it's well explored, because the subsurface is relatively well understood, because maybe the risks are more on the operational side, whereas in other regions, it'll be more of an exploration risk. You can imagine that the risk transfer mechanisms will be very different. So we'll consult with the countries that you see listed here: Turkey, France, Hungary, Greece, Poland, the Netherlands, and obviously we in Switzerland have a bit of experience in that as well. And then, of course, we'll be looking at public-private partnerships that we know of, and if possible at all, to consult with private companies so that we see what their drivers are, to identify also which way do we need, say, to design public and public-private schemes that eventually will end up in the hands of industry, because at the end of the day, we can expect that industry is in a much, much better position and much more capable to administer such insurance schemes than, for example, public entities. We will then start looking at the international level, and international in this case means outside Europe, looking at the countries that Philippe Dumas has already identified in Africa and South America. This will start in July 2019. And I think I'll close here, and I'm open for questions as long as you can channel them through Philippe's, through Philippe. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you, Christian. So indeed, now we open the floor for a question and answer session on the second part on financing. So maybe you can first raise your hand. I see, for example, Paulo Participado from Portugal. Paulo, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. It has been very useful for those that are just starting with their risk approaches. My question for Gunther in particular is what next for the countries that are not being involved in the list of the work plan currently? How could Portugal apply for that, for instance? Thank you.
Thank you, Paulo. Yes, of course, it would be fantastic. And basically, these are countries on the list that that are in GEORISK. But of course, looking at other countries would be really fantastic, because we'd love to help countries develop such schemes. So best to get in touch with Philippe, and then we'll set up the question, send you the questionnaires and so on.
Okay, do we have more questions? If not, maybe we can look at the chat. Okay, so I don't know if Günther and Christian, if you can answer some of the questions in the chat. If not, I will raise you. For Günther from Martin van der Noot, again, are there any procedure standard from oil and gas to use for geothermal?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for that question. I think there are a number of strategies related to quantifying the risks related to, for example, exploration, which I think are also applicable to the geothermal industry. And I understand, especially in the academic environment, in a number of Horizon 2020 projects, there is actually a large attempt to facilitate this crossover of risk and uncertainty management related to exploration risk to geothermal.
Okay, I see that a number of questions is about the presentation today. Indeed, this webinar is first recorded, so you can have a record of the webinar, and the presentation will be available. You'll have some minutes also. All that will be launched when the GEORISK website is also to be launched. We speak about maximum 2 to 3 weeks where the GEORISK website will be available, and all the presentation from today will also be available. Maybe one more question. I saw one from Frédéric Guinaud. Is there a simulator that can help evaluate the impact of different mitigation schemes on investment risk?
Difficult question. We have not seen that for the moment, but interesting question. We'll try to see if something has already been done on that topic. A lot of inventory. I have not seen nothing, but we can keep in touch to see how to orientate the potentiality of such an idea.
Maybe to complete indeed the simulator, we will do notably a 10 years assessment of a newly created fund. In the 10 years assessment part will be a simulation. We could see how we can integrate this estimation and investment cost.
Why not?
Just look at if we have we have a lot of questions. We cannot answer all of them, but I think we have done our best to try to answer some of them. Maybe the last one from Federico Games. What is the key metric used to evaluate the impact of uncertain input in a project? Technical, economical, NPV, or both?
Both. Both for sure. Both for sure.
Günther, you want to add something?
I must admit, I didn't quite catch the question.
What is the impact? Is more technical or economical on NPV?
In terms of these geological risk transfer schemes, the fundamental purpose is really to share the geological risk, but of course it has big impacts on any economic metric of the project. You know, call it NPV if you want to. And for example, in Switzerland, as in France, the schemes payout depends on the impact on the NPV in case the subsurface doesn't deliver as you expected it to do. So there's always a very tight link. And the idea, of course, of these insurance schemes is to bring you back to at least where you were to begin with. In other words, we public funding organizations would like to help you minimize the downside if you do not find a suitable reservoir.
Okay, thank you. I think we are done with some questions. We will answer the other one writing to you, to the different people answering questions. I think we can now close this one-hour webinar. It was well attended because we were 120 people maximum. We are still 100 people. So I thank you all for attending this webinar. As we said, there's a series of workshops at national level, so you can follow also GEORISK at national level. And we will present that also during the European Geothermal Congress 2019. So also invite all of you the 11th to 14th of June in Den Haag in Netherlands for one of the largest geothermal events in Europe, where we'll discuss investment, risk, but also technical and scientific inputs. With that, I close the webinar. I wish you a good day, and I thank you all again for following us today. Okay, goodbye.